What is up, most distinguished patrons of this channel? Today I have a special treat for you, and it's something that very few people I think have ever seen, and I've never seen it, and I think it's pretty rare. So with that said, let's get into it. So I generally don't consider myself to be a lucky individual, aka, I haven't won the lottery yet. No, yeah, I guess I'd have to play it in order to win. But anyways, in the last couple, month, things have been going my way per se. And what I mean by that is, well, I lucked out and got a free homemade welder that I did a whole video on. That's pretty awesome, and it works, although kind of janky as I would have expected. But for whatever reason, the welding gods are smiling on me and, well, us as in this channel, and has provided something for us underneath this shirt here. I'm trying to hide it so I don't ruin the surprise. But something that is very unusual, very unique, and that I have never seen one like this. And, well, no, it's not this wood level, although that's pretty cool. But it is something made out of wood, and it happens to be a welder. So with that said, let's take a look at what we got under here. So I was browsing the Facebook Marketplace, and I came across this guy, which is something I have never seen before. Now, I have seen welders in a wooden box kind of like this, but they have looked a lot different than this. And I definitely have never seen a old wood box welder that is designed the way that this one is. So to start out, I'm going to shift this back, and I want to show you the stinger that came with this thing. So take a look at this stinger. You have a wood handle on this. And I kind of enjoy the cloth tape on this guy that will help you from experiencing the joys of electricity if you happen to have wet gloves. But this is pretty uncommon. I've only seen a handful of welders that had wood handles for the stinger, and we're talking like pre-50s, like early 50s and prior. So no doubt this is going to be pretty old. I mean, incredibly old by welding standards, to be honest with you. But I've never seen a stinger quite like this with this big of a handle grip on it. And I gotta say, I got big hands, and this is about the biggest stinger handle I've ever held. So that's kind of cool, almost like it was made for me. Now the vice grip ground clamp is pretty humorous as well. This would not be original. Someone had, looks like brazed on, yeah, it's definitely bronze, brazed on this onto this clamp. Originally, this probably had some kind of a C-clamp ground on it. That's what I've seen with a lot of these old welders. But hey, it'll work for what we're doing today. Let's take a look at the welder itself. So this welder is branded as an Elgin welder, and supposedly was made by the Elgin Welder Manufacturing Company in Elgin, Illinois. Now, Elgin, Illinois still exists, and it's actually not that far from where I live. And the interesting thing is the previous owner to this reached out to the city of Elgin and asked them if they had any record of this company existing or any information. And they responded back to him apparently that no, we don't have any information. And as far as we can tell, the company never existed, which is pretty interesting. That would tend to lend itself that this was more or less a 1 or 2 or 3 off device. There weren't many made. It was probably built in someone's backyard, their basement, or their man cave, their garage, whatever have you. And very few of these were probably ever made. Now, I find it interesting that this actually has a very legitimate data plate, and this would have cost a fair amount of money when this was made, and it makes it look official. I mean, to me, just looking at it, oh, this is a bigger company, they produce welders. So to have no record of them for that city, as well as I spent a fair amount of time on eBay and on Google trying to find a duplicate of this, and I was unable to find anything even close to this, which really lends me to believe that this could be a one-off or very few produced, probably never left that area that this existed in, and the rest of it was basically lost to history. So I find this data plate pretty interesting. The first thing is that it appears to be made out of aluminum. Now, aluminum data plates, I would have thought would be newer than the 50s, but I could be mistaken on that. If you guys got an opinion on that, feel free to share it. But this data plate for something as old as possibly the 40s to 50s seems a little bit too new. Now, it's held on with more or less just slotted screws, so flathead screws, which does tell me, well, this is probably original and it is probably old, but I wouldn't have suspected aluminum data plates back, say, in the 40s, but again, I could be wrong. Now, on this data plate, it says that it runs on 110 volts. I find that interesting because 110 used to be considered the standard back, I don't know, in the 20s, 30s, maybe even the 40s, and at some point they changed it to like 115 or 120. So the fact this is labeled 110 volts makes me believe that this again would be probably pre-50s. Now I find it very interesting, the amp load on the inputs is 28 amps, which is a tremendous amount of a load, and it's actually believable. Even though this is a sub 90 amp stick welder, due to the fact it's probably nothing more than a transformer in the box, all that reactive power it's likely going to spit back at the power source, aka your wall outlet or whatever, makes that amp loading believable. It lists 60 hertz, which is correct for the AC frequency that would power this even back in, say, the 40s. Amp output, this is only rated at 75 amps. I find it interesting that the serial number says 528. Now, if they produced 528 of these, I would tend to believe that I would be able to find some remnant of this ever existing. Like, that's a lot of these welders, far more than I think a lot of the other wood box welders that I have seen on eBay, because I can find where you can find 3, 4, 5 that are absolutely identical to one another. And the fact I can't find one of these and supposedly that many had been produced, it makes me wonder if that's just not a number slapped on something to make people think you've made more of them. I also find it interesting that all of these numbers are hand hammered onto here. I can tell that because they're all a little bit crooked. They did a better job on some of them than other ones, but each number was individually stamped. So again, that goes back to that this isn't probably a mass-produced item and somebody was building it in a garage. This has got to be one of the coolest things I've ever seen on an older welder. Ta-da! So what it has is basically a nice switch to adjust amperage, and this thing being that it's probably nothing more than a simple transformer with a couple different taps on the output, much like maybe a Lincoln Tombstone. This would make perfect sense as to how you would adjust the amperage. You're just basically adjusting the winding ratio of the transformer, which is nothing more than a copper little clip there with no isolator. And all of these have isolators to isolate the clip from the wood. And it goes 10, 25, 50, 75. Now, I don't know what kind of welding you're going to do at 10 or 25 amps. That's so absurdly low that even 1/16 rods wouldn't run at 10 amps. 25 amps maybe they would. And who knows, maybe they set this up to where you could use it as a battery charger of sorts at 10 amps. I don't know for sure on that, but that's a possibility. Now keep in mind, I believe this thing outputs AC current, so for the 10 amp to work for a battery charger, it would have to have some kind of a bridge rectifier in it, which I doubt it has, but we're going to actually open this up and look at it. But over here is 75 amps, which is max output. Now the stinger that came with this, I do believe is the original one. It is finished and shaped just like this little selector switch. So to me, I would say a very high probability that that is original. These numbers in here appear to be metal, and they're almost like hammered into the wood. Pretty interesting, like they're individual letters. That at first I thought that was just like somehow a raised piece of the wood, but no, they're actual metal and they're hammered into there to indicate amperage. That's pretty awesome. So the guy I bought this from said it worked and that he did use it in the past. Now I took his word for it, and honestly, if there's some problem where this doesn't work, I really don't care because it's still really cool and will look great on my toolbox over there. I'm gonna open this up and inspect what we have going on in here and make sure that nothing is too ridiculously janky, as in bare wires touching one another. And that's something I've learned with any kind of older welders. I swear there's always stuff like loose wires touching the case to where you plug it in and something's gonna pop. Hopefully it's the breaker and not you. I've never taken this apart, and I don't think the internet's ever seen the inside of one of these, so this is gonna be interesting. I'm gonna start by just taking off screws on this top and seeing if I can see inside and figure out what's going on. So here's the first thing I saw when I opened this, and I gotta say, it smells exactly like you would expect something like this to smell, which is old, janky cloth wiring, dust, and a little bit of danger. And I like that, but it smells delicious. So we have all cloth wiring. Down there is the transformer, and I didn't mention this earlier, but I have a sneaky suspicion that the transformer in this was probably stolen out of something else. So maybe a street light or something that was readily available in the 40s or 50s. And the guy basically partially rewound the transformer to make it useful for welding, or maybe it's custom, I doubt it. But long story short, this person likely reused something that was readily available. Now I got to looking in here, and I haven't looked too good, but I don't know if you can see it in there. See all that junk in there? It's like all, I don't even know. Hopefully I don't find a dead mouse, but I think a mouse was living in this sucker for quite some time. Yeah, nothing like 70-year-old mouse poop. Well, I'm gonna go and get something to kind of grab in there because I really don't feel like getting the black plague from that. So let's see what I can get out of here. So this is only about half of the Taj Mahal that mouse built in this sucker. So what I'm gonna do is take this outside of the tin shed and blow it out because I can't get in front of that transformer and it's like chock full. Hopefully I don't find Henry the mouse and his siblings in there dead, but we'll find out on that. All right, I'll be right back. All right, I got this thing cleaned out and I didn't find any dead mice in there, so that is a huge plus. And I did not find any chewed up wiring. I don't know if mice just didn't care for the cloth wiring or what, but everything looks good in there. So I think this thing's gonna work. Now I'm still gonna do a couple quick tests with a multimeter to make a determination if it's safe to plug in. So to start things off, I'm going to take this power cord, which by the way, this has a grounding lug on it. However, this device does not have a ground because what would you ground it to? You would have to do it to the transformer core in theory, but the wood box doesn't have a ground, so that's kind of not needed on this. Who said this thing was safe to use? Anyways, I'm going to take a look and put this in an off position and just look between the terminals. And we should not have any continuity. So right there we do, and we do not here. That is a good sign. Now I'm going to switch it to 10 amp, and we should have continuity. And we do. Now I'm going to look from both of these plug ends directly to the output. And we do not have any continuity, and just for testing sake, here. So that means the coil of wire that the input is wrapped around on that transformer, that is not directly shorted in any way to the output. So that is a great sign. Odds are when I plug this in, it is not going to trip a breaker, and I don't have 120 volts on the output unregulated. So that's all good. The other thing that I'm curious about is that I should have continuity here. And I do. If I didn't have that, that would mean that the output wires to this, that coil of wire on the transformer, there's a break or it's shorted, and this wouldn't work. So since this is AC, the polarity doesn't matter. It's 50-50 negative positive. Everything looks good, like this is functional, so that is all a great sign. So I got my volt ohm meter set to AC voltage, and I am going to flip this to, I don't know, the 10 amp setting and just check what the resting open circuit voltage is to make sure that we're in the ballpark. If I were to see 120 volts, I know that we got all sorts of problems. Now, realistically, I don't think I will because I tested it, but you never know with stuff like this. Now, it's interesting to note, they don't make welders anymore, or not that they really ever did, where when you adjusted your amperage, your fingers are like an inch away from mains voltage. So you're 120 volts, or even worse, 240 volts. I mean, it's basically the equivalent of putting your hand in a breaker panel by changing that lever there. So thankfully, it's only on 120 volts. But you want to be smart about it. If you were to touch any part of that copper terminal in there with your bare hand and you're holding on to something that's grounded back to wherever the power is coming from, you would have all sorts of issues. So let me safely go to there and let's check if we have any voltage. So it's at about 47 volts open circuit, which is not too surprising. Let me go up to the 50 amp setting and see where we're at there. About 60 volt open circuit, which is in a ballpark of what we should be. So that all looks great. That is a great sign. Now I'm gonna go and put these gloves on so I'm not handling any of this crap with wet hands. It's like 100 degrees in here and that's just asking for me to get lit up. I find it interesting, this welder does not hum at all. Now, I guess I didn't expect it to make much noise, but it's basically dead silent, which is a little bit surprising. Almost every stick welder that welds on AC I've used, the lamination of the core vibrates, making noise. Yeah, as I thought, this thing doesn't hold a 332 too well anymore. I'll have to do it at an angle maybe. Well, there we go. Well, I'm on the 50 amp setting and got 332 6013. Let's see what it does. Well, doesn't work too well at the 50. Let's go to the 75. I might have to try a different rod. As I suspected, look at that. It does weld. It tripped a breaker on the generator. It's on a 30 amp breaker and it overloaded that. So that was fun. Pretty hard to get it started with the 332 6013. And that bead is unbelievably cold. Very tiny bead, which isn't too surprising. Now this claims 75 amps. I don't think we're going to get anywhere near that. It's more or less welding like, I don't know, 75 is more like 45 or 50, but hey, whatever. What I'm going to do is switch to 1/16 rods. The only 1/16 rods I have handy are are 308, so stainless rods, but that'll work fine. These run between 25 and 50 amps, so my guess is we'll be in the ballpark. But luckily nothing's burned down yet, so let me get set up and we're gonna try and run a 1/16 rod. Yeah, that actually works pretty good with the 1/16 rods. So I managed to get it to weld pretty decent, and I gotta say these little mini 1/16 rods of 308L stainless really ran pretty good, better than I thought. I bought these for an upcoming video and never ran them before now, and they run great. Apparently you can run them on AC by the results. It ran real smooth. Now on this 3.2 mil or 1/8 inch material, I would say that it's almost enough amperage. On this thicker 1/4 inch, you're not anywhere near the right amperage. I even did a little weave there trying to get it to wet out better, and it's just too cold. And based on what I saw, when I have it maxed out at 75 amps, according to the machine, it seemed like a lot less. And I went and did a full range of testing on this. And based on what I observed with my meters, the output is not 75 amps. It's closer to 50 or so. But realistically, it welds pretty good. And it's odd how quiet it is. You don't get that buzzing like with most transformer welders, and it has to do with how they wound the core, the wire, and all of that. It just doesn't make much noise, and it's actually pretty efficient. So realistically, this machine is really designed to run 1/16 rods only. Anything bigger than that, and good luck. Now for input going into the machine, when I had it set at 75 amps, 115 volts was our resting average voltage. 30 amps is what the input side of the machine, aka what the generator breaker, saw. Now a lot of that power is reactive power. The power factor of this machine was about 0.47 or so, so pretty low. But the input amperage loading is almost all reactive power. Case in point, the actual amperage that it needed when it was welding is only about 16 amps. And I know this is a lot of data, but to simplify all of this, when I was actually welding, it consumed 1,830 watts or about 16 amps at that voltage, which isn't a whole lot overall. I've seen far worse than this for this kind of output. Now the actual output was around 30 volts to keep that rod lit, which is pretty high. Those stainless rods apparently need a lot of voltage to maintain an arc. And the actual output amperage of the machine is 46 amps average. So at a setting of 75, it's actually equal to somewhere around 45 to 47 amps, which is about 1,380 watts, because again, amps times voltage equals wattage. So if we take our output wattage and input wattage, we can basically calculate out efficiency. And the efficiency of this machine is actually 75%, which is, I guess, within a range of an efficient older transformer. Now, other transformer welders could be significantly less than even 60%, but for the most part, most welders are up in the 60s, I would say. So this actually isn't that bad. Again, the problem being, yes, its efficiency is this high. However, due to that reactive power, due to poor power factor, it's going to overload the shit out of any breaker you put it on. And on an average 20 amp breaker, you're probably not even going to weld for maybe 15 to 30 seconds before it trips the breaker at max output. So that's kind of unfortunate. Well, this old sucker still welds, and it doesn't do a bad job with 1/16 rods. Now, based on what I see, having kind of cleaned it out and really got a good look at everything, I definitely think this is probably pre-50s. So somewhere in that mid-40s to maybe very early 50s, and that ballpark is where this would come from. I mean, realistically, this Stinger, I do believe, is the original one for this. And by the way, I took this data plate off to look at it because I thought it was aluminum, It's actually brass, and it's like, I don't know, silver washed or something to create this silver color. I'll put a picture up right now of the backside, but this is definitely not aluminum, which is a great sign that this is actually going to be fairly old. I mean, let's face it, it looks old, it is old. Now, the original color of this, based on what was behind this data plate, was a little bit brighter of a green than this, so that's kind of interesting. Now, as I was looking at this here, I kind of had a couple thoughts, and one of which is I almost wonder if this wasn't produced as a demo unit for like some kind of a potential military contract for small portable stick welders. And well, this being probably a 101 or very low numbers, they didn't pick it, contract didn't get awarded, therefore this ceased to exist. It's entirely possible that that's the case, and that would also make sense as to why they painted it green like this one is versus some other color. Like the typical ones were unpainted and varnished brown or black, much like the inside of this or like this handle. So it's kind of odd that this one is green in color and appears to have been that color originally, because most of the stuff from that age simply isn't, and I don't think anyone would have pulled that off the paint behind it. Overall, this thing does weld good, but I don't see myself ever using this for anything other than a demonstration piece. Now, my plan with this thing is I'm going to go and fix it up. I'm not going to make it perfect, but all of the splits and where it's been dropped a few times and the missing handles that aren't on the side, I'm going to fix all of that up, and I'm probably going to give it a coat of paint to match what color it is, and then it's going to be an awesome desk ornament. And I may bust it out occasionally for people who want to see what it was like welding on something like this. And honestly, it welds just like, I don't know, a tombstone would at lower amperage. Not really any different, although I will say this Stinger is kind of hopeless to weld with 1/16 rods. It just doesn't grab them tight enough. And then not only that, even 332 is just not tight enough. I don't know, I'm gonna refurbish this, make it look like new, and maybe we'll see it in a future video when I show it off when it's completed. So there you have it. This little thing's awesome. It's definitely a conversation piece, and if you have any thoughts as to what anything you saw in this video, where it came from, like the transformer, or even if you know of another one like this that exists, feel free to share it in the comments. Otherwise, thanks for sticking around. Until next time. 47 volts. So, whoa, whoops.